After reading this episode, you will be able to learn about the distribution of nickel and cadmium in the human body, understand the absorption and utilization, identify the food sources, describe the deficiency and toxicity of both nickel and cadmium. Dear students, in this episode, we shall provide you with a broad spectrum of nickel and cadmium. For your convenience, this episode has been divided into two parts. One is nickel and the other one is cadmium. Let us start with nickel. Nickel's essentiality and its vital role in human nutrition was suggested in 1930s and mid-1970s respectively. Nickel occurs naturally in the environment at low levels. Nickel is a natural element of the Earth's crust. Therefore, small amounts are found in food, water, soil and air. Natural sources of atmospheric nickel include dust from volcanic emissions and the weathering of rocks and soils. Nickel is used in its metallic form combined with other metals and non-metals as alloys. Nickel is also incorporated in some food supplements and it is involved in the metabolism folate and vitamin B12. Hence, nickel is an essential element for human nutrition. Let us understand the biological role of nickel. Nickel plays a major role in helping the body absorb the iron it needs and thus prevents anemia. It also helps towards building the strong skeletal frames by strengthening bones. Nickel is also present in DNA and RNA, which means it is found in every cell of the human body. It assists in breaking down glucose and getting energy required by the body. It contributes to the production of certain enzymes that initiate important chemical reactions such as the development of nucleic acids. Nickel is found to be beneficial, being an important cofactor to various enzymes where it acts to accelerate the normal chemical reactions occurring in our body. This element has been shown to take part in reaction catalyzed by oxidoreductases and hydrolases. It may activate certain enzymes related to the breakdown or utilization of glucose. Nickel may aid in prolactin production and thus be involved in human breast milk production, and it is an important factor in the cell membrane and also the lipid. Distribution. Nickel is widely distributed among human tissues. Its concentration throughout the body is extremely low. The highest nickel concentrations are found in the bone, lung, kidney, liver, brain and endocrine glands. Nickel is also found in breast milk, saliva, nails and hair. Let us identify the sources of nickel. Drinking water is the main source of nickel as it leaches from metals in contact with drinking water such as pipes and fittings. Foods of plant origin have substantially higher nickel content than foods of animal origin. Foods like cocoa, dark chocolate, oatmeal, spinach, dry legumes, soya bean and soya products have high nickel contents. Fruits and vegetables contain intermediate nickel content, while nickel is found in low amount in foods of animal origin like fish, milk and eggs. According to nutritional standards, fish, chocolate and oatmeal are three of the most nickel-rich food products available. Absorption, transportation, utilization and storage of nickel. Nickel is probably absorbed from diets and is eliminated mainly in the feces. Studies have documented that an average nickel absorption from normal diet is between 20 to 25%. However, absorption can increase from water sources. Water-soluble nickel compounds can be absorbed by lungs into the bloodstream and removed by the kidneys, and insoluble nickel compounds can remain in lungs for longer time. Nickel can enter body via inhalation, ingestion and dermal absorption, but the route by which nickel enters cells is determined by its chemical form. Fat-soluble nickel carbonyl absorbs across cell membranes by diffusion or through calcium channels, and insoluble nickel enters the vertebrate cells by phagocytosis. Nickel is absorbed across the intestinal brush border by a carrier and a passive diffusion. Nickel ions compete with iron for carrier transport in the small intestine, and thus absorption increases with iron deficiency. Transport occurs through diffusion or as a part of complex with an amino acid or binding ligands. The main transport protein of nickel in blood is albumin, but nickel can also bind with histidine, cysteine, aspartic acid and globulin and distributed throughout the tissues. Uptake of nickel into the cells is with an amino acid transferrin or through a divalent cation like calcium channel and thus distributed throughout the body. Highest amount of nickel is stored in the thyroid and adrenal glands. Most absorbed nickel is excreted in the urine and small amounts are excreted through the bile and sweat. Let us understand the deficiency of nickel. Nickel deficiency are rare, but when they do occur, they can be extremely serious. Those with kidney problems, cirrhosis of liver or have vitamin B6 deficiency are at a higher risk of developing a nickel deficiency. Symptoms of nickel deficiency can range from urinary tract infection to severe allergic reactions, most often seen in the form of skin rashes. In very severe cases, those that suffer from a nickel deficiency may experience paralysis alongside inflammation of the liver and lungs. Nickel is a constituent part of all organs of vertebrates, and deficiency can reduce growth, particularly during intrauterine development. This can also decrease the life expectancy of reproducing animals. Nickel deficiency is accompanied by histological and biochemical changes and reduced iron reabsorption, which may lead to anemia. Studies have indicated that nickel deficiency results in lower activities of different dehydrogenases and transaminases and alpha amylase, which affects carbohydrate metabolism. A marked decrease in metabolism was observed in the case of energy sources, fat, glucose and glycogen. Nickel therefore performs a vital function in metabolism and is an essential element. Toxicity of nickel. Toxicity of nickel by inhalation, ingestion or skin contact occur throughout occupational exposure have shown to give rise to elevated levels of nickel in blood, urine and body tissues. Studies have documented that modern control technologies have markedly reduced the occupational exposures to nickel, but studies have also revealed that several million workers worldwide are exposed to airborne nickel and its compound. Non-occupational sources of nickel exposure include food, air and water, but the levels found are lower than those found in occupational situations. Human exposure to highly nickel polluted environments causes a variety of pathological effects. The toxic effects of nickel on the lung was recognized first in the 16th century. By the early 1930s, cases of exposures to nickel carbonyl and its effect on skin was recorded. Incidences of lung and nasal cancer in workers exposed to nickel was observed by 2003. In 2008, nickel received the shameful name Allergen of the Year by Gillette 2008. Thus, these observations led to the interest in the impact of nickel on human health. The toxic effect of nickel is related to the way it gains entry into the body of the organism. Contact with nickel and its compound can cause a variety of adverse effects on human health. Oler et al. In 1997, McGregor et al. 2000, Seliker and Oler again 2003 have documented that such contacts can result in nickel allergy in the form of contact dermatitis with skin rashes at the site of contact, lung fibrosis, cardiovascular and kidney diseases, and cancer of the respiratory tract. Sensitization to the metal is generally caused by direct and prolonged skin contact with the metals that release nickel ions. Data indicates that women have greater risk for dermatitis, possibly due to a more frequent contact with nickel containing materials like jewelry, buttons, watches, zippers, certain shampoos, detergents, etc. Death due to nickel-induced adult respiratory distress syndrome was reported by Randall et al. In 1994. Nausea, vomiting, abdominal headache, cough, shortness of breath and giddiness has been reported as symptoms of toxicity of drinking contaminated water with nickel chloride and nickel sulfate. The chemical form of metal and its solubility is a key determining factor in the toxicity mechanisms. Water-soluble nickel compounds can be absorbed through lungs into the bloodstream, causing irritation of the nose and sinuses and loss of sense of smell or perforation of the nasal septum. Long-term exposure may lead to asthma, bronchitis, or other respiratory diseases. Further exposure to nickel carbonyl can cause headaches, nausea, vomiting, chest pain, and breathing problem. It may even lead to pneumonia and death. Cancers of the throat and stomach has been attributed to inhalation of nickel carbonyl and insoluble nickel compounds. Nickel subsulfides is a well-known respiratory carcinogen. When inhaled, lodges themselves deep in the lungs as solid particles and in contact with epithelial cells. This gain entry into the nucleus of the lung epithelial cells and cause a heritable change in the chromosomes. Kawanishi et al. In 2001 has demonstrated and documented the nickel subsulfide induced changes in chromosomes of both double and single-stranded DNA in human cells causing cancer. Nickel is known to be a calcium channel blocker affecting calcium metabolism. It is also known to cause inflammatory response through regulation of expression of transcription factors involved in inflammatory process. The discussion above presented a good review about nickel, its distribution, absorption and toxicity in human body, including food sources. With this information and understanding, we shall move to the study of cadmium for its absorption, utilization, sources and toxicity. Cadmium is a chemical element, soft, bluish, white metal, is chemically similar to the two other stable metals, zinc and mercury. As a bulk metal, cadmium is insoluble in water and is not flammable. However, its powdered form it may burn and release toxic fumes. It was discovered in 1817 simultaneously by Stromeyer and Hermann, both in German, as an impurity in zinc carbonate. Let us understand the biological role of cadmium. Cadmium has no known function in higher organisms, but a cadmium-dependent carbonic anhydrase has been found in some marine diatoms. The diatoms live in environments with very low zinc concentrations, and cadmium performs the function normally carried out by zinc in other anhydrases. Distribution of cadmium in the body. About 30% deposits in the liver and 30% in the kidney, with the rest distributed throughout the body. High concentrations of cadmium are also deposited in the pancreas and salivary glands. Other storage sites may also include the joints, arteries, periosteum, or covering of the bones and virtually all body tissues. Let us identify the food sources of cadmium. Human uptake of cadmium takes place mainly through food. Food rich in cadmium are liver, mushrooms, shellfish, mussel, cocoa powder, and dried seaweeds. The most common sources of cadmium are foods such as rice and wheat, which are grown in soil contaminated by sewage, sludge, superphosphate fertilizers, and irrigation water. Large ocean fish such as tuna, codfish, and haddock concentrate within their tissues relatively large amounts of cadmium. A significant source of cadmium is refined foods, processed meats, refined grains, instant coffee, and cola drinks are among the most common sources of cadmium. Cadmium may also be used as plating material in food processing plants, thereby finding its way into processed food products. Cadmium used in food industry finds its way into water supplies. Soft water is more dangerous since the calcium in hard water has a protective effect. Old galvanized pipes and new plastic pipes, that is PVC, are sources of cadmium in our drinking water. Let us understand the absorption, transport, utilization, and storage of cadmium. Cadmium is first transported to the liver through the blood. There it is bound to protein to form a complex that are transported to the kidneys. The highest concentration of cadmium is absorbed in the kidneys of humans, and up to about 30 mg of cadmium is commonly inhaled throughout human life. The uptake through the human gastrointestinal is approximately 5% of an ingested amount of cadmium, depending on the exact dose and nutritional composition. On an average, as a daily intake of 30 to 35 microgram cadmium, 95% of this taken up with food and drinks. An average smoker has an additional intake of 30 microgram per day. Several factors can increase this amount, such as low intakes of vitamin D, calcium, and trace elements like zinc and copper. Furthermore, a higher dietary fiber increases the dietary cadmium intake. People with low iron supplies showed a 6% higher uptake of cadmium than those with a balanced iron stock. This is the main reason for the higher cadmium reabsorption in people with anemia and habitual iron deficit. After absorption, cadmium is transported throughout the body, usually bound to a sulfhydryl group containing protein like metallothionein. In the blood, cadmium moves from the plasma to the red blood cells, where it binds mainly to metallothionein and hemoglobin. Cadmium ingestion stimulates production of metallothionein, a zinc and cadmium binding protein. The cadmium content of the body increases with age in industrialized societies for less than 1 microgram in the newborn to 15 to 20 milligram in adults. Metallothionein plays an important role in the excretion of cadmium. Excretion of cadmium occurs through the kidneys and liver, but the excretion rate is normally very low. Toxicity. Cadmium toxicity is increasing in incidence today for several reasons due to its use as a coating for iron, steel and copper. It is also used in copper alloys, stabilizers in rubber and plastics, cigarette papers, fungicides and in many other products. Often, these industries then pollute water, air and food with this metal. Women are more prone to cadmium toxicity than men. Cadmium exposure is a risk factor associated with many illnesses including kidney disease, early atherosclerosis, hypertension and cardiovascular diseases. The respiratory system is affected severely by the inhalation of cadmium contaminated air. Shortness of breath, lung edema and destruction of mucous membrane as part of the cadmium induced pneumonitis are described. Cadmium toxicity showed to be associated with occurrence of iti, a disease under which patients show a wide range of symptoms such as low grade of bone mineralization, high rate of fractures, increased rate of osteoporosis and intense bone associated pain. An epidemic occurrence of the iti disease was observed in the Junzu River Basin in Japan in 1940s. Cadmium is a well-known inhibitor of cellular respiration. Many of the toxic effects of cadmium stem from its accumulation in the kidneys. Renal dysfunction affects calcium, vitamin D, phosphorus and sodium levels, resulting in proteinuria, glycosuria, renal hypertension and other metabolic disorders. Cadmium inhibits release of acetylcholine, probably by interfering with calcium metabolism. Cadmium also inhibits the methylation of phospholipids, interfering with cellular membrane functions. Cadmium causes hemorrhages in the autonomic ganglia with secondary nerve cells necrosis and direct damage to nerve cells, particularly nerve fibers. Cadmium toxicity alters calcium and phosphorus metabolism, can result in osteoporosis, osteomalacia and arthritic conditions. Interference with zinc metabolism can also result in neuromuscular dysfunctions. Cadmium replaces zinc in the arterial walls, leading to reduced flexibility and strength of the arteries, resulting in atherosclerotic plaque, narrowing of arteries and hypertension. Interference with zinc-dependent enzymes such as carboxypeptidase can result in impaired digestion. Cadmium may contribute to prostate difficulties and impotence problems by interfering with zinc enzymes and cellular energy production due to a cadmium-induced zinc deficiency. Growth impairment and the failure to thrive syndrome are also associated with cadmium toxicity. Alterations in calcium and vitamin D metabolism can result in dental caries and tooth deformities. Cadmium is also associated with hyperactivity and learning disability. Alopecia is commonly associated with cadmium-induced zinc deficiency. Anemia is an early sign of cadmium toxicity. Displacement of zinc by cadmium results in impaired protein synthesis. Inadequate protein synthesis interferes with regeneration of joint surfaces, which leads to joint pain and inflammation of the joints. Cadmium can also displace calcium in bone structures. High levels of cadmium can cause demineralization of bones and total inhibition of bone repair mechanism. Cadmium toxicity is associated with various malignancies. A high percentage of cancer patients on tissue mineral analysis programs reveals cadmium toxicity. Weakness and hardening of cerebral arteries due to cadmium toxicity results in an increased tendency for cerebral hemorrhage. Cadmium impairs detoxification of alcohol in the liver, which may explain the connection between cadmium toxicity and liver cirrhosis. By interfering with zinc metabolism, cadmium can also initiate or aggravate a diabetic condition. Cadmium from cigarettes acts as a lung irritant. Cadmium also replaces zinc in collagen, causing brittleness and breakage of the fragile alveoli in the lungs. An enlarged heart is often secondary to narrowed arteries and high blood pressure. Cadmium toxicity is a common contributor to these cardiovascular conditions. Cadmium toxicity may impair the ability of the liver to detoxify iron. Cadmium causes an increased retention of sodium by way of its action on the kidney. This aldosterone-like effect can induce an inflammatory process. Cadmium can adversely affect the elasticity of lung tissue. By interfering with zinc metabolism, cadmium toxicity may allow tissue copper buildup to occur, resulting eventually in the causation of migraine headaches. Students, let us sum up today's episode. Nickel is one of the trace mineral in our body, present in very small amount, but it plays an important role in overall health of the human body. Nickel aids in iron absorption as well as adrenaline and glucose metabolism, hormones, lipid, cell membrane, improves the bone strength, and may also play a role in production of red blood cells. Optimal growth, healthy skin, bone structure, enhances alkaline phosphate. The frequency of nickel allergies or toxicity is still growing, and all sources of human exposure to nickel should be recognized and examined. Coming to cadmium, cadmium is a heavy metal of considerable toxicity with destructive impact on most organ systems. It is widely distributed in humans, the chief sources of contamination being cigarette smoke, welding, and contaminated food and beverages. Cadmium is an extremely toxic industrial and environment pollutant classified as a human carcinogen. Chronic cadmium inhalation may result in impairment of pulmonary function with obstructive changes. Cadmium toxicity may cause renal dysfunction with both tubular and glomerular damage with resultant proteinuria. Bone changes appear to be secondary to renal tubular dysfunction.